Well, hello there. Today I'm going to explain the faction mechanic of the Wild Horde, focusing on the reserves and the ability to mobilize creatures out of that. I've noticed many new players often ask what mobilize means and how that works. So I thought a video series on faction mechanics could be quite helpful, right? Let's start with the basics. What are reserves? Reserves are a pile of cards next to your deck. This is where the cards you reserve go. Once per turn you have the option to reserve a card. Generally, you can only reserve creatures, with some exceptions. An important thing to note here is, these cards are not hidden from your opponent, so they can always check which cards are in there. So why reserve a card at all? Well, reserving a card grants you 1 additional mana to spend until the end of your turn, and having more mana than your opponent can give you a significant advantage over them. Among the Wild Horde cards, some can interact with the creatures in your reserves. For example, the Gelatinous Mass is a creature that has the entrance effect of buffing all creatures in your reserves by +1/+1. But now that the creatures are in your reserves, how do you get them out of there? Well, this is where the Mobilize ability comes into play. Mobilize is defined as summons 1 random creature from a player's reserves within a mana cost range of X, targeting the highest mana costs first. Here's an example. Some Wild Horde cards let you mobilize X. Here I have a Penitent Follower and the Improvised Medic in my hand, and it's turn 1, with just 1 mana to spend. The Improvised Medic has an entrance ability to mobilize for 1. This means it will search your reserves for a creature card with a mana cost of 1 and summon it to the board. In this case, I reserve the Penitent Follower to gain that additional mana, then play the Improvised Medic. The Penitent Follower gets mobilized out of your reserves, and the Improvised Medic's other effect, healing you for 2 life whenever you mobilize a creature, is also triggered. This way, I played creatures worth 3 mana in turn 1 and healed 2 life, which is a great start, isn't it? There are also cards like Sudden Onslaught that let you mobilize multiple creatures at once. Sudden Onslaught first mobilizes 2 or less, then 3 or less twice. Note that it specifically says mobilize 2 or less, which means if it doesn't find a creature with a mana cost of 2 in your reserves, it will then check for 1 with a mana cost of 1. Additionally, you draw a card for every time you did not mobilize a creature. So in the best case scenario, you would summon creatures worth 8 mana by just spending 5. Or use the card to draw more cards if you don't have the right creatures in your reserves. Some spells explicitly state they are reservable. For example, in this game I have a Penitent Follower and a Frenzied Fervor in my starting hand. Frenzied Fervor is a spell that unexhausts the target creature and gives it +2/+2 until the end of the turn. If I use it on the Penitent Follower, I could attack immediately and put early pressure on my opponent. I could reserve Gary here, but since I don't have a card in my deck to mobilize a card with a mana cost of 4, and Gary is quite important to my deck, I won't do that. However, I also have Roaming the Wild, a spell that buffs all creatures in your reserves by +1/+1 and lets you draw 2 cards. It is also reservable, meaning I can reserve it to gain that additional mana. This way I can play the Penitent Follower, unexhaust and buff it with Frenzied Fervor, and immediately attack to deal 3 damage on turn 1. There are some things to keep in mind when it comes to reserving and mobilizing. First of all, always be mindful of what you want to reserve. You should know which creatures you can mobilize with your deck and which you can't. Avoid reserving key cards to your deck that you can't mobilize later. However, if the additional mana you get from reserving them gives you a significant advantage, it might be worth it. Another important point is that the cards in your reserves are not necessarily safe. Not only are they visible to your opponent, giving them the chance to prepare for your mobilizations, but there's also the risk of cards like Devilish Larceny. This Plundering Guild spell steals a random card from your opponent's primary faction zone. And guess what? The reserves are your primary faction zone. I've lost a couple of games because keycards I reserved got stolen, so always consider the possibility of such counters. There also are some neat combos involving mobilizing and reserving. One example is Call of Drakt and the Sudden Onslaught. Thanks to the Totem of Drakt, you draw a card and gain an additional mana whenever you summon an innate creature this turn. By casting Sudden Onslaught after Call of Drakt, you can mobilize up to 3 creatures, which not only gives you an additional 3 mana, but also lets you draw 3 cards. There of course are countless other possible combos out there. Some of them I displayed in my Cards and Tankards Tips and Tricks short series, so you might want to check that out. I hope this video helped you to understand how the Wild Horde faction mechanic works. In case you still have any questions, how about you reach down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like, comment and maybe even subscribe. Goodbye.